Hello, welcome to the Sovereign Magazine Show, a transformational experience where conscious conversations meet embodied wisdom. Each episode invites visionary healers, thought leaders, and change makers to share their journeys of awakening, offering listeners practical tools and soul-stirring insights to reclaim their inner authority. We have the absolutely gorgeous Abby Teixeira back today with her Cycle Breakers Sacred Boundaries series. If you've missed the foundational episodes, go listen to episodes 1 through 4. But today, we are talking about women of color in recovery, reclaiming space in a healing worlds that aren't built for us. So,
Mhm.
without further ado, Abby's going to share more about herself and more about this topic today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nicole. I'm so grateful to be here. I love this series. It's just so much fun.
Yes, it is.
So I'm Abby Teixeira, as Nicole shared, and I'm a speaker. I'm a published writer and author, a trauma recovery guide, and feminine leadership mentor. I'm also a complex trauma survivor, and I'm personally in recovery from addiction for over a decade. It's actually going to be 12 years this October, and I'm a mother of four. And the work that I do is I primarily guide cycle breaking women and femmes, especially those healing from trauma, addiction, and survival based identities. A lot of them are Black, Indigenous women of color. They're mothers, they're healers, they're coaches, they're creatives, and I really help them move out of isolation and survival and into embodied, community rooted leadership. And I do that by holding sacred spaces where they can show up with their grief, their rage, their truth, their wisdom to really be witnessed and integrated and then transformed into sovereignty. And today's topic is really, it really for me is important because for me, recovery wasn't necessarily just about healing from addiction, trauma, or survival. It was what I really found was that for many women of color like myself, it's also healing from things like invisibility, assimilation, cultural shame, navigating systems that were not designed with us in mind. And so for me, really, recovery became not only a return to self, but really a return to my culture, my ancestry, my voice, and my belonging. And that's really been the deep work that I've been doing in the last, I would say about intentionally the last 3 years, that reclamation journey, which I'm really excited to chat about today.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And I know I've said this to you 1,000 times, but I appreciate your vulnerability with your story because I think it is paving the way and opening up people for their not only their own healing, but global healing. And I know that your story isn't an easy one. Not only does it come with addiction, but it also comes with abandonment wounds and all sorts of different types of wounds. You've got so many, and I identify with many of them. I do feel um, that although I escaped the traditional addiction of alcohol or drugs or smoking or things like that, I do have an addiction to food. I love food. Absolutely love food. And I have what's called food noise, and I'm constantly thinking about food from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed. Um, but in the traditional sense, I will say that I have quote unquote escaped that despite my past, if you will. However, the part that I do not have is what we're talking about today. I'm a white woman living in a predominantly white culture, especially with all the white men in this world trying to do some very awful things.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I haven't had that. However, I get to see it through the lens of my husband, who is Black, and my daughter, who is obviously biracial. And I get to see things from their perspective, but I don't have that deep inner knowing. And so I would love to provide some more foundational things for people today, especially around what it's like for you to seek healing in spaces that aren't built for not just women of color, but really anybody of color. This whole world is built
Yeah.
on white people.
Yeah.
So it's like white people dominance and all of that. So why don't we share a little bit more about that and whatever comes up for you around how we can maybe lay some foundations.
Absolutely. So, my background is Latina, so my parents are both from El Salvador, and much of my healing journey really happened in spaces where very few people looked like me. right? And so I'm deeply grateful for many of those spaces. I'm here because of many of those spaces, but yet we often experience things differently, right? There's cultural nuances, which now I realize, a big part of why not a lot of people that look like me are in this spaces is because of the whole vow of silence that many of us that come from these cultures inadvertently kind of, what do you call it? Um, kind of like go into, right, and accept this vow of silence and not talking about these things. And there's family dynamics that come into play, a lot of shame, ancestral realities even that weren't really reflected in a lot of the conversations that were being had in these spaces. And so there were times when I really found myself thinking, like, is anyone else that looks like me carrying this? Am I the only one? Does anyone else understand what it means to navigate trauma, recovery, while also carrying stories of immigration, displacement, poverty, violence, war, colonization, and cultural expectations? And so I wasn't really just healing my own wounds. I was carrying generational stories in my body that I wasn't really aware of because once again, I wasn't in those I wasn't in spaces where this was stuff that was even talked about, brought up, or anything like that, right? And so I think recovery is rarely about the individual. For many of us, especially women of color, we carry family expectations. I'm the oldest daughter of an oldest daughter of an oldest daughter. That in itself, is like we have this like unspoken, kind of relatability as eldest daughters, where it's like we have to carry everything ourselves. We don't talk about things, all of that kind of stuff. And then, there's obviously collective trauma, intergenerational survival patterns, religious conditioning, which was part of my journey for sure, immigration stories, that kind of a thing. And so I knew that I had inherited certain things, being the daughter of a Salvadorian immigrants. I inherited many stories around survival, war, poverty, sacrifice, all those kind of things, right? And they really shaped my nervous system way before I even had language to explain what this was. So many of us were raised by people who were surviving. I was raised by two survivors who were trying to survive, you know, and it wasn't because they didn't love us, but because survival was all that they knew, right? And so when I entered into recovery spaces, that's all I knew. I knew how to survive, right? And I came to a place where I finally knew that I couldn't survive on my own anymore, right? And so that's when I started to like, just for me, it was the willingness piece, just being willing to try whatever, to get out there to, if it could, I will always remember a mentor of mine early on who would tell me, might help or can't hurt, might help, right? That was her thing. Whereas like, if you're going to try something, it can't hurt and it might help. So why don't you just try it, right? And so that's exactly what I started doing. I was just like, okay, so somebody suggested group therapy, let me try that. Somebody suggested this or like all these kind of things, right? But in the end, what I really, really noticed is that predominantly it was Western frameworks, right? And again, most of these healing spaces, they mean well. They mean well, right? And like I said, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't be almost 12 years sober if it wasn't for these spaces. But again, they were very much heavily centered around Western frameworks where a lot of the things that were missing were there was no mention of cultural context, collective healing, spiritual traditions, community centered approaches, understanding of racialized experiences, which I definitely they've been part of my trauma story for sure. Right. And so I thought that healing looked one way. It only looked in therapy and recovery programs and self development, and which I threw myself at all of the above. Right. And while they did help me tremendously, I really eventually realized that there were still pieces of me that were longing for something deeper. And so for me, healing really became more complete when I stopped trying to fit myself into these healing spaces and started allowing healing to fit me, right? And that really took a journey of like looking, of researching, of, more than anything, of self-discovery, right? And so, yeah, that's a little bit of the context around the conversation.
Mm. I love this so much because you said cultural context, and it's something that being in Sovereign, I learned so many different things in so many different ways from so many different people. We not only have our country cultural context, but we have our femininity cultural context or our motherhood, right? And then we have like our ethnicities and our backgrounds and all of that. And I want to shed light on that a little bit more because I distinctly remember when my daughter got her therapist, the one that she has now, and she loves her so much. And she's African American. She was recommended by my best friend, and my best friend was like, "I think this would be the perfect therapist for my daughter." And anyway, it wasn't until I realized when she came out and she said, "She understands me."
Mhm.
And that was when I was like, "Oh." Yeah, I kind of was missing that piece again. And it wasn't a conscious thing or anything like that. We just got assigned to a previous therapist before and we just went with it. And she just happened to be white, of course.
Yeah.
But there was no depth. She's like, I like that she understands if I talk about my hair, she knows what I'm talking about. It's like those simple little things that we don't even think about.
Yeah.
We have somebody who understands our cultural context and then you add the layer of recovery, right?
Mhm.
That cultural context on top of the other things, there is this deeper connection and relationship to healing that can happen because you're not only healing the wounds or recovering from the trauma of, let's say, addiction, but you're also healing the other wounds as well. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, so there's all these nuanced layers, right? And so, one of the things that I wanted to ask you today as part of our conversation was what do you wish healing spaces understood the most about women of color in recovery?
Yeah, I think I love that you shared that story because representation matters so much, right? When women of color are visible, something really powerful happens. I know for myself, I very much gravitate, very much like your daughter, when I hear of another Latina woman, with a very similar story as mine, like I tune in. I'm like tuned in and I'm thinking in myself like me too, or like that instant relief of like I'm not alone or my story really belongs here, right? And this is why I do what I do. Like the personal experience of having, like, I share very openly about my complex PTSD journey, my recovery, my motherhood journey, my estrangement journey, ancestral healing. And I hear time and time again women who share with me and reach out like I thought I was the only one, right? Or they're like how did you even begin this like journey of reclamation? Like I didn't even know that that was a thing, like all of these kind of things, right? And the only reason why the conversation gets started is because I was willing to show up and be visible in my journey and my story and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so representation isn't just about being seen, it's really about helping others to be able to see themselves. And there's something so powerful because I always talk about how isolation is such a killer. Like when we isolate because we think that we're the only ones, no one will ever understand us, no one can help, all of those kind of things, right? I myself I'm speaking from a place of like my lived wisdom where, I was deeply isolating for a very long time because I truly thought I was the only one. And so I think it's representation is so important. And then also um for me, like it's really about returning to my ancestral roots, right? This last little bit of my journey, which is probably the most important part of my journey for sure. My healing journey has really expanded because I'm reconnecting with like my Indigenous Mayan ancestry, ceremony, nature, ancestors, community-based healing. That's a key one, community-based healing. We live in a Western society that healing is very individualized, right? Like very individualistic. It's like, you have your therapist, like very commonly, I'm healing, I have my therapist, and then it's just like a one-on-one kind of thing, right? And what I have found, and the most success that I have had in my personal healing journey has been through community, right? Where it's like, and again, we're not abandoning modern healing, we're expanding it, right? Because I still very much value coaching, therapy, recovery communities, nervous system work. Those are all things that are part of my tool belt, and I very much value it, but it's not the end all be all for me anymore, especially as a woman of color, right? Because I've learned that healing can happen around a fire. through storytelling in community and through ritual, through remembering. So for me, some of the most powerful medicines that I was searching wasn't for new, it was actually ancient. And it was about remembering those medicines, right? And it's such a beautiful journey because there even in our own culture there is a lot of um what's the word I'm looking for, there's a lot of discrimination, like even in our own culture, there's a lot of discrimination, like where there's light skin, light eyes, light hair still much more favored than the dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair, even in our own culture, in our own communities, right? Like to be considered indigenous is like you kind of look down upon, like that kind of a thing, because we've been the culture has been so deeply colonized, to like really look at those other kind of qualities as like better than that kind of a thing, right? And yeah, so it's just been like this whole like new layering of really understanding, and then really opening up myself to like these cultural contexts that are so important for all of us to be seen and reflected in, right? Because if you don't see anyone that um, looks like you, that has had a similar experience, you really do fall into that isolation trap, right? Where you think I'm truly alone in this. I'm the only one, and especially because there's like these reels that I see sometimes, they're kind of like these content creators who are like they're Latino, and like they share these kind of funny parent reels, and it's so true, where like in our culture, our parents don't believe in depression, they don't believe in anxiety. If you say like, oh, I'm depressed, it's like, go make yourself busy, go clean the house, like you're only depressed because you're all that kind of stuff, right? And so it's almost like this gaslighting, where it's like you're having these very real experiences, and you're gaslighting your family to believe that, oh, that's not a big deal. Oh, like don't think of that, or like you're being too dramatic, or you're too emotional, you should just get over it, it's not that bad, that kind of a thing, right? And it's like, no, it is actually that bad. Right? And when you hear other people finally name these things, I can't count how many times I've had people come and reach out to me and tell me like, like, I so relate with your story, like I also had that messaging growing up, I also heard those things from my parents and all of that kind of stuff, right? And they're like, I really thought I was crazy, I really thought that I was making things up, and now I'm realizing that I was just so deeply like, gaslit into like believing that, my reality wasn't reality, right? And by you showing up and speaking up about these things, right, it connects the lines and the dots, and then you realize it's like, oh, I'm actually not the only one, I'm far from it, and let's do something different about this.
Yeah, that's what I love about you so much, because I've said that like a thousand times as well. Is like, oh my gosh, you've given me a name for something that I knew existed, but I didn't have a name for it. And now I do, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I appreciate when people like you do show up and they do show that level of vulnerability, because it is within our stories that we are sharing that somebody else can go, me too.
Hmm.
And I don't feel like I'm invisible anymore. I do feel seen and heard and valued, and they can begin their healing journey because you have had the courage to step up. And I know it hasn't been an easy process at all. And that's why I'm always so incredibly grateful for when you are here. But as we start to kind of wind down the show, I definitely would love to give our viewers and listeners today some sort of takeaways of how one can just start to take that step, because it's not easy, especially in a world like my husband always says, and we live in a very diverse area. I mean, we live in San Diego, California, like we're right next to Mexico, but in terms of Black, I think like the population is like 3% Black, but we
Mm.
can see Black people here. It's not like we can't. But
Yeah.
he's like, I can go all day never seeing a Black person, but you can't go all day never seeing a white person.
Mm.
Right. And I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, yeah, that's actually really true, honey. I'm so sorry. Like, it's just such a whole different way to carry yourself. And
Hmm.
so, as we wind down the show, I'm also reminded of this one instance that I'd love to share because I think people in rural places, like this story I'm about to share, will be like, oh, okay, somebody else has experienced that. My husband had a coworker one time who had to go on an assignment in Utah, and she happened to be Filipina. And she showed up, and so many white people kept coming up to her saying, "What are you?" They had never seen a Filipina before, ever, and they didn't know what she was. And that blew my mind coming from like the huge melting pot that I live in here in
Yeah, yeah.
California. I just was like, how do you not know what a Filipina lady looks like? That's just crazy, but that is the reality. And so when you are putting yourself in places and spaces, consciously choosing to have somebody who either looks like you or who has experienced the thing that you're going through is so important. So as I've set those two examples, what would be your advice or takeaways for anyone who is trying to heal from addiction of some sort, or even just the cultural aspect of it, of not feeling seen or heard?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, like I mentioned, in the last couple of years, for sure, I have had a really powerful reframe in my own recovery journey where it's really been stopping, like trying to fix myself all the time, because like Lord knows I have so many certifications, I have so much trainings, I have like, all these like different accolades of like trying to like, fix and all of that kind of stuff and become someone new and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really now I realize that it's not about any of that stuff. It's truly about reclaiming. So whoever you are and whatever your roots are, learn about them. Like learn about those roots and then reclaim, right? Like reclaim, like for me, it's looked like reclaiming my voice, my culture, my story, my intuition. Oh my goodness, my identity, as an Indigenous woman, like reclaiming that, right? And like for me, it's like I spent so many years with this pressure to try to like shrink those exact parts of myself just to belong, right, in these other spaces and all of that kind of stuff. But for me, what the deeper healing really became when speaking openly, learning to take up space, honoring my roots, refusing to separate those parts of myself, that's what makes me whole, right? And so it like once again, like I guess my biggest thing is like healing isn't about you becoming someone new. It's really about you becoming who you've always been, remembering who you've always been before you learn to disconnect from yourself through the addiction, right? Whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, food, all the different ways that we learn to disconnect from ourselves, right? It's about reconnecting and then reclaiming those parts of ourselves that we maybe don't even know exist in us, right? Because again, we don't see it, we don't hear it, all of that kind of stuff. If you search and you look, you will find, and it's not always easy, but I think you do an incredible job of this, Nicole, where the sovereign community is very diverse, right? With so many beautiful women from all walks of life who have their incredible gifts to share that are so unique, right? And so like in there I can see like if I want astrology, if I want like like cycle breaking, if I want, like all these different areas, and it's like when you again, if you look, you will find, right? And you can find these amazing communities where we're all welcome, we're all on this journey together, and we're allowed to take up that space in those places, right? And so for my final message for women of color is that you don't need to become less of who you are in order to heal. We heal most deeply when we are allowed to bring our whole selves into the room. And so I really invite you to bring your whole self to wherever room that you're going into and get curious. Get curious, start to question things and start to say, well, like, why do I believe this? Or is it really true? And like all of those kind of things, right? And then find your tribe that, will reflect your brilliance back to you and be able to share that you are absolutely not alone and that, you do belong here. So
Yes, yes. I love all of this. And my questioning and all of that started with doing my DNA because nobody knew what I was. They would just say I was a mutt of white people. And I was like, I just want to know, like, where do I come from? Which countries and all of that. And it
Yeah.
was so much more than they thought. I mean, I am a mutt, even more than they thought,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
was really empowering for me to start to know that part and also to look into my biological mother's history through once I found my had my DNA done, I was able to kind of track back
Yeah.
her lineage and stuff because I don't know her. And so that was kind of the beginning of my healing journey against my mother wound. So there are many ways that you can do it. One of them, I highly recommend you working with Abby because she's just so incredibly empowering. So all her details will be in the show notes. And if you are interested, definitely like, share, and subscribe to this series. We're going to be talking about breaking the silence next, right? Am I correct about that? No, 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 no. The body remembers is next. I scrolled a
Mhm.
little too far. The body
Mhm.
remembers next, somatic healing, nervous system repair, and safety
Mhm.
after trauma. So we'll be talking about that next. And so she'll be back on the show. So thank you so much for being here today. And as always, having a beautiful conversation with me.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you all.